Hello everyone, I am Lucrezia Sperindio, PhD candidate at the University of Warwick. Today I will be talking about the politics of the late Republic, and I will focus especially on the end of the late Republic and civil war. What I am proposing in this presentation is first a reflection on the historical context of the late Republic and what are the contemporaries' thoughts on the end of it and why did it end it. And here we'll be following Wiseman 2010. The second part of this presentation will involve a parallel between Cicero's rhetoric of nobilitas and President Obama's rhetoric. And here we'll be following Samponaro 2018. Okay, we'll start from looking at, of course, the end of the late Republic, especially caused by the series of civil wars that characterized the last decades of the Republic. And in particular, we'll start from what idea did the Augustan poets have of it, especially Horace and Virgil, who both lived through the last decades of the Republic, but of course flourished with their work under Augustus. So Horace in Epod 7 depicts the Romans as scelesti, so the doers of an evil crime that is a scelus, so technically is a term for divine and religious crime that needs expiation and divine retribution. The civil war becomes a scelusque fraternae necis, a crime of fratricide, which is itself the result of the first and foremost fratricide of Roman mythical history, i.e. when Romulus kills Remus in, of course, the myth of the foundation of Rome. Virgil, similarly, at the end of the Second Georgic, speaks of a discordia fratris, a brotherly discord, and speaks, of course, of the spilling of brotherly blood. So in the Augustan poet's perspective, civil war becomes a scelus, a divine punishment, and is the result of Romulus's fratricide of his twin Remus, and it's therefore a violent and bloody crime that citizens themselves committed against each other. But this, of course, is the perspective of, let's say, slightly later authors. What actually late Republican authors think of it, and what did they see as sort of the cause of the civil war and the actual end of the Republic. In particular, we'll be looking at Varro, who in the Vita Populi Romani speaks of a bicipitis civitas as the reason for the civil discords. So the citizen body becomes two-headed, according to him, since Gaius Gracchus. That's what the text here says. Now, what is he really referring to? Basically, he's referring to the Gracchus period, starting with Tiberius Gracchus in 133 before Christ. So during his tribunate, Tiberius proposed a law to sort of redistribute the public land, the agri publicus, which was the property of the Senate, to the smaller landowners and lower classes who in the previous year have remained without any land. And of course, well, they flocked to Rome without unemployment, becoming, of course, dangerous. So Tiberius's design of law aimed at employing these masses and, of course, reducing also senatorial power. However, of course, he never actually passed this law, as he was vetoed and eventually killed in disorders that followed, especially this lex frumentaria, the proposition of this lex frumentaria. His brother, Gaius Gracchus, 10 years later, 122 BC, managed to make pass both the lex frumentaria and the lex judicaria. The lex frumentaria was inspired by the one of his brothers, so sort of he managed to get this passed. The lex judicaria involved the assignments of some judicial offices that normally were held by the Senate to the equites. In particular, it is a matter of jury courts that were previously made of senators Now they were made of equites, the equestrians, a different class. So again, the power of the Senate was effectively challenged by the Gracchi brothers, and this may have caused clearly the sort of bicipitis civitas of which Varro talks, because the Senate was for the first time opposed evidently to the people. Of course, if Tiberius Gracchus, was eventually murdered, also his brother died in a violent clash between his supporters and the senatorial forces. So we might say that although, the Gracchian laws remained, the two brothers ended in violence following the passing of these laws. Florus, who's a later writer, also shares Varro's opinion that what actually divided the Roman people and started the series of violent clashes was, again, this Gracchian division of the civitas in a two-headed body. Now, of course, we think that Florus is sort of looking at Varro for this interpretation, but we might as well look at later authors on this particular period of the late Republic. For example, Dionysius of Halicarnassus, he's portraying, the Roman state as a peaceful one, in which, of course, everything was taken care of by normal political business, until, of course, the time in which Gaius Gracchus, in the exercise of his tribunician power, destroyed the harmony of the constitution, as the Romans have never yet ceased from killing each other and driving each other out of the city, not refraining from any irreparable act in the pursuit of victory. So clearly, later, the opinion of later historians is that, the violence that started with Gaius Gracchus in this case is somehow the starting point of all the civil violence that followed later on. Appian in the Civil Wars also says that no sword was ever brought into the assembly and no civil bloodshed ever took place until Tiberius Gracchus, a tribune of the plebe engaged in legislation, was the first to be killed in political strife, and many others with him, crowded together on the Capitol, were killed around the temple. So again, the Roman state is depicted as peaceful and, solving its own problems peacefully and through political debate until basically the Gracchi brother. Velleius Paterculus too, as he sort of gives an account of the situation, says this was the beginning of civil bloodshed and the impunity of the sword in the city of Rome. From this time on, right was crushed by violence. The most powerful demeanor was the one that took precedence. Disputes among citizens that had previously been solved by negotiation were settled by armed force, and wars were begun, not for good cause, but according to the profit they brought. So Velleius Paterculus goes even to a major extent to see basically the violence of the whole situation as starting a chain that sort of will undermine later epochs too. So, of course, what does Cicero think in all of this? I think it's interesting to look also at what Cicero says in the De Republica when he claims through Lelius, the main character here, the main character here, he says, for as you see, the death of Tiberius Gracchus, and even before that, the whole policy of his tribunate has divided one people into two parties. Populum unum divisit in duas partes. So clearly the Gracchi are seen as responsible of the division of the Roman citizenry. Now, the reasons, if we want to sort of summarize, schematize a bit, of three in chronological order. The murder of Tiberius Gracchus, as it is implied by Cicero's Lelius, which I've just seen in the De Republica, and explicitly endorsed by Velleius and Appian, who possibly both were inspired by Asinius Pollio. Of course, Asinius Paulus is the writer of a historiographic work that is lost to us, but that probably recounted the epoch of the civil wars from a contemporary point of view. So Cicero's Laelius also points at the policy of Tiberius Gracchus. If we just go back of one slide, of course, he says, well, the death of Tiberius Gracchus, and even before that, the whole policy of his tribunate. So clearly, the policy is also a problem. Now, therefore, probably referring to the lex frumentaria. Varro's idea, the one that we've seen, of course, the most sort of the recent one, as in like the closest to the actual period, 44 BC, it's the lex judiciaria by Gaius Gracchus. So the fact that the Senate was actually diminished in power as it was deprived of the jurisdiction over the jury courts. So what we can really see here is that there are two main poles. The Gracchi policies are the problem to some extent, either the lex frumentaria or the lex judiciaria, versus, well, the kind of license to violence that sprang from Tiberius Gracchus's murder. And we will see how these two positions equals effectively the polarity between popularis and optimates. In fact, well, with the popularis, which are embodied mostly, as we will see, by Varro and some selection from Sallust, well, Varro lived, of course, through most of the late Republic, and he is our main witness probably for the period, he criticized the laws passed by the Gracchi as the main problem in creating a division in the society, especially because I lost the point, but yeah, sorry. The Gracchian laws are the responsible for the division of the society, especially because, of course, when the jury courts were handed over to the equites, although this is always, taking power away from the senators, nevertheless, power was given to the equites, who were, in any case, who rose to power only because of their wealth. So this would, in the end, augment the gap always between the ruling class and the people. So that's, of course, the position of the popularis. The problem is the ethical approach of the ruling class that even if, the Gracchian law aimed at, the lex judiciaria particularly aimed at getting, detracting some power from the Senate, it actually gave, power always to the establishment, always to, in this case, the equites, who were powerful, got power not because of their nobilitas, at least like the senators, but because of their wealth. And the critique of the equites and their wealth is a cardinal point of Varro's works. We see that in the Menippean satires, he says, nowadays the cavaliers gleam with cosmetics and normally buy their horse for an actic talent. So that's, of course, quite easy way to get a horse, but in any case, that the whole thing means that they are rich enough the richness, wealth is of course, the measure of their right to power. And also in the Res Rusticae, he says, and so in the land where the shepherds who founded the city taught their descendants agriculture, their descendants have made pasture out of cornfields from avarice and in defiance of laws. So again, the power to the equites and the wealth that the equites have are kind of the sign of the new times, with, of course, all the corruption and greed that characterize them in the eyes of Varro's. Sallust similarly critiques the nobilitas for the same reason, basically. He says, is sort of what we know famously Sallust' critique to wealth. I didn't put any text in here because I think it's pretty obvious if we look at the proem of the Bellum Catilinae, but you know, there are several passages in which this is evident. Here, he actually relates the aristocracy with the Gracchi killing, and basically says that this sort of shows how the aristocracy, you know, acts for its own good. So he says, well, it is true that in their eagerness for victory, the attitude of the Gracchi was too unrestrained. So the license to violence is a problem. But it is more proper for a good man to accept defeat than to use evil means to overcome a wrong. The aristocracy used its victory just as it chose, getting rid of many people by killing or banishing them. It thus added more to its future fear than its future power. This has been the usual cause for the ruin of great states, when each side wants to defeat the other by any means at all and take too ruthless a vengeance when it has done so. So clearly the aristocracy is seen as sort of using evil means to beat the Gracchi and somehow to limit them, as if also, you know, to get rid of them. Effectively, the violent episodes after at least Gaius Gracchus were endorsed by the Senate. So there is a problem. The nobilitas, through their wealth and their status, are effectively harming the people in the eyes of the populares. Now, the Optimates, of course, have a different ideas of what is happening, and Cicero in the Procestio identifies, well, first he identifies the two categories and says there have always been two classes of men in this state who have sought to engage in public affairs and to distinguish themselves in them. Of these two classes, one aimed at being by repute and in reality populares, the other optimates. Those who wished everything they did and said to be agreeable to the masses were reckoned as populares, but those who acted so as to win by their policy, the approval of all the best citizens were reckoned as optimates. So clearly, the optimates present themselves as those who want the approval of the best citizens. They don't want just the masses or everyone to like them, but the best citizens. So there is a moral quality to their legitimation to govern, to rule, basically. And this comes out even more in the De Oratore, where Cicero, as he is addressing Crassus, says, well, as for your final comment that the Senate not only can, but ought to serve the people, what philosopher could be so weak, so soft, so feeble, so committed to the standard of physical pleasure and pain as to assert that the Senate serves the people, when the people itself has handed over the Senate the power of controlling and guiding it like reins? So the people is this, let's say, uncontrolled, well, this body that is unable to control itself unless it has a rational part in the government and in the Senate, in this case, to rule it, to control it, to guide it. So clearly the Optimates, and Cicero especially, perceives as their duty to, you know, regulate the people and be the ethical and rational part of the body of the citizenry. So, of course, we have two very different point of views. With Varro and Sallust, we have seen a precise accusation against the wealth, greed, and arrogance that the aristocracy displays. And these are the forces responsible for the division of the state and the fall of civil war. It's this, the division between, of course, the people and the degenerated ruling class. Cicero, and of course the Optimates with him, believes that the Republic has always been controlled by the best people, who are in charge of leading the citizens, controlling them, guiding them. And therefore, every attempt to undermine this status quo is criminal and responsible for civil war. And in particular, the Gracchi killings are somehow justified in the view of the Optimates because they are menacing the status quo. They are, menacing the whole good government. Therefore, this attempt must be repressed, must be controlled and deleted it, basically. And that's how they also justify the violence of the civil war, of the Gracchan killings that then led to the violence of civil wars being justified. So therefore, both these, well, all these authors, especially we have seen Varro versus Cicero, are invoking a bicipitis civitas. They are talking of a citizenry, a body of citizens that is divided, but they also, of course, embody it by their own opinion, being conflictual and being, of course, the leading opinions of the two major contraposed tendencies there. So this is, of course, the end of the first part of my presentation. I will now look at a different article and a different piece of scholarship that nevertheless I think it's very significant for the module of the politics of the late Republic in relation to well, the main text that is analyzed, the first Verrine. And I think this article is useful in making students understand that, well, all these classics things we do are not real, you know, are not just tied up to the past, but are actually, you know, linked to our contemporary times and can be used to interpret our times. So I'm going to look at the first paragraphs of the Verrines, of the first Verrine, to analyze Cicero's beginnings. So, well, we've seen before a critique of wealth. Cicero's too, at the beginning of his career, in the first Verrine, criticized wealth as part of his argument against Verres. Verres, of course, being the governor, having been the governor of Sicily, he basically was accused by the Sicilians to have stolen, well, a great amount of wealth from them. And Cicero is, of course, being the attacking advocate. So he, of course, he defends the Sicilians and attacks Verres, and this, of course, is his first chance to build a meaningful forensic career and a full political career. So we'll see what he does. Of course, he criticizes the man and says, well, he is a man already condemned in everyone's opinion by his life and actions, yet acquitted by the magnitude of his wealth, according to his own hope and public boast. So clearly Verres has some sort of protection from his wealth coming from his, of course, rich condition. And in the fifth paragraph, he goes on to say, well, if that man's enormous riches shatter the sanctity and honesty of the courts, I would have at least achieved this. It would be clear that it was the administration of justice in the Republic that was lacking, rather than a criminal for the judges or a prosecutor for the criminal. So what he's saying here is that, of course, this man is so rich that he has bribed, well, many people, and in the first Verrine, he quotes examples as if in an investigation, and of course makes clear that this man has already tried to bribe several magistrates and members of the jury courts, and of course by criticizing the wealth of Verres, he is defending the state and the Senate too from doing something you know, worth of rebuke. In fact, well, Verres' greed and plundering is quite famous. He goes on to argue no man's property was safe. Even if it had been given to him by his father and grandfather, he was deprived of it on that man's command, that man being Verres. Countless sums of money were taken from farmers' property by a new and nefarious system. The most faithful allies were included in the number of enemies. Roman citizens were tortured and killed like slaves. The greatest criminals were acquitted in court through bribery. That same man, while Praetor, plundered and stripped all the most ancient monuments. He not only did this in the case of public statues and ornaments, but he also despoiled all the shrines which were consecrated by the holiest rites. So clearly this man is ruthless in his behavior, even to the extent, paragraph 13, to kill and torture Roman citizens. So we see how wealth is a problem in the whole civil war scenario too. I mean, we've seen it before. And of course, he's also, well, a sacrilegious man. He plundered and stripped all the most ancient monuments and sacred places. So clearly he's a man to be despised in Cicero's view. But Cicero's role is not only in accusing this, of course, man whose greed and plundering have hit and hurt the Roman state. Cicero's role is also needed, deeply needed by the Senate, as he makes clear at the beginning and at the end of the first Verrine. In fact, at the beginning he states, "So judges, with the greatest goodwill and expectation of the Roman people, not so that I might increase the unpopularity of the Senate, but so that I might relieve it from the dishonor which I share with it." The Senate had been previously accused of being corrupted, of being subjected to bribery. So, of course, the fact that condemning Verrines is a way also to clear the Senate from any records for corruption. And Cicero goes on, "I have brought a man before you whose case will enable you to restore the lost reputation of your courts, return to favor with the people of Rome, and satisfy foreign nations." And then towards the conclusion, as he reminds us why he's doing this, he says, "Well, I advise and I warn of that which I know, that this opportunity has been given to you by divine influence, so that you might liberate your whole order from hatred, unpopularity, infamy, and shame. Therefore, we are held in contempt and despised by the Roman people. We are branded with a heavy and now long-standing infamy." So clearly he knows how Roman people think of the ruling class, of the senators, and the corruption of the whole establishment. So clearly Verrines' accusation and condemnation is key to restoring this, to restoring, well, the importance and ethical purity, let's say, of the Senate. And Caesar, of course, is the man for the job, because I shall reap the rewards of my hard work, industry, and diligence. And I will make it clear that no one in the memory of man is seen to have come before a court more prepared, more vigilant, or with his case better arranged. And again, he goes on, "Well, when I took this case at the request of the Sicilians, I thought it a great and distinguished thing for me, that they who knew my integrity and self-control were willing to risk it all on my loyalty and diligence. Then when I had undertaken this business, I proposed some greater action to myself, one by which the Roman people would be able to see my goodwill towards the Republic." So of course, what is of interest here is how he portrays himself as the person for the job. So of course, he has a lot of good qualities: hard work, industry, diligence, vigilancy, and, he's prepared for this. And of course, he's prepared to do something also not just good for himself, because of course he's in the middle of the starting point of his political career, but he's also, the man for the job, for the state. He will defend the Republic, he will restore the Senate's opinion. So clearly, he is the guy for this job. And however, in his definition of all of this, why is he pointing at the diligentia, the industria, the ingenium, the labor, the officium, the temperantia, the vigilantia, all these great qualities? Well, because of course he is a homo novus. He is, his father is not a senator, he's an equus, and he doesn't have all the qualities that, well, he doesn't have basically the nobilitas to be a senator or to be a consul according to the usual route, to the usual cursus honorum. He has to make himself from nothing, basically. So of course, he is stressing all these virtues, diligentia, industria, ingenium, that are key definers of Romanness. So they are part of the Roman tradition of what a good man should be like, to supply his lack for nobilitas. Of course, Cicero is an ambitious political character who wants to get to becoming a consul, and he will do this, notwithstanding his starting social condition that, of course, he was not an aristocrat originally. But in any case, of course, he, homo novus, rises to defend the Senate, the most traditional and traditionalist institution. So of course, although, as Samponaro notices, although he portrays himself and uses this being an homo novus, being someone who, needs to work hard to get the job done. Nonetheless, he is the guy for the job, and nonetheless, he is struggling to get into the Senate, to rise to those positions that are basically part of the long-standing tradition of Roman Republic. So Samponaro says, despite all his protest about senatorial corruption and his insistent threats of a judicium populi, the young novus homo is inherently conservative because, of course, well, he uses the key definers of Romanness, and he fights for the Senate, for the most traditional and traditionalist institutions to get this done. So clearly this is how the sort of rhetoric of novelty, he is homo novus, but he works for the Senate, and this rhetoric is based on him needing to work hard to achieve it, and on a critique of basically the wealth and the sort of corruption charge in which the Senate has incurred of late. But he will defend all of this, and well, he managed, as in, of course, he will win the various various lawsuits, and he will then rise to power, as we famously know. But of course, well, Samponaro analyzes some of this similar rhetoric that has been used by Obama. Of course, well, situation is completely different. We don't have to say that they are the same, but it's interesting to see how Obama, to rise to power and get the presidency role, he's exploiting in some way the rhetoric of the homo novus. Well, we know Obama is an Afro-American, famously, especially after the recent situations over the world and in the US especially, we know how difficult it is for Afro-American in the US. But so Obama is an outsider, and he knows it, and he uses this characteristic to access the establishment. So of course, some extracts from different speeches underline the fact that no one really imagined that he would get to that point. So he says, a few weeks ago, no one imagined that we'd have accomplished what we did here tonight in New Hampshire. And also he goes on in a similar speech in North Carolina. He says, when this campaign began, Washington didn't give us much of a chance. And also, on the election night victory speech, he admits, but he also uses this, I was never the likeliest candidate for this office. We didn't start with much money or many endorsements. Our campaign was not hatched in the halls of Washington. So he's conscious and aware of his being a novus homo, someone who, an outsider, basically. And as such, of course, he needed hard work, just like Cicero, to get the job done, basically. He says, I was a young organizer then, intent on fighting joblessness and poverty on the South Side. And I still remember one of the first meetings I put together. We had worked on it for days, but no one showed up. Then, of course, he sort of recounts the event. And, well, he then stresses towards the end. All the volunteers looked out the window, and they decided that night to keep going, to keep organizing, to keep fighting for better schools, better jobs, and better healthcare. And so did I. So, of course, hard work, this will to fight, to go on, to have diligence and endurance in this are key qualities also for Obama's. And again, in his inaugural address, he basically recognizes the value of this hard work. He says, well, in reaffirming the greatness of our nation, we understand that this greatness is never a given. It must be earned. And then he goes on and says, well, it has been the risk takers, the doers, the makers of things, some celebrated, but more often men and women obscured in their labor, who have carried us up to the long, rugged path towards prosperity and freedom. And then, of course, he goes on, he says, we will build, we will restore, we will harness all this we can do and we will do. So clearly the sort of stress on the doing, on the making, on the working is a pivotal point of Obama's rhetoric as an outsider, as someone who needs to do all of this and to make sure, well, that this is understood by his electors. And there is also tiny critique of wealth, if we want to look in detail, is in his inaugural address. He says, well, that we are in the midst of a crisis is now well understood. Our nation is at war against a far-reaching network of violence and hatred. Our economy is badly weakened, consequence of greed and irresponsibility on the part of some, but also our collective failure to make hard choices, etc. But what he says is a consequence of greed and irresponsibility. So again, sort of slight critique. So, well, that's basically it. I hope this was interesting, and I, of course, based this presentation on these two recent items of scholarship, which I'm sure will be available for you to consult, as I think that they can be, you know, helpful tools in defining a little bit better the politics of the late Republic. That's Weismann, and then, of course, Samponar is helpful to kind of make students reflect on the relevance of classics and especially well of Cicero's works in interpreting our modernity. And hope you enjoyed. So look forward to hearing your questions and thoughts.